All right, good evening and welcome to the Board of Education meeting with Rhode Island Olivia Lake Lilly Independent School District number 2534. And we'll begin tonight with our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And follow that by our mission statement. The mission of the Bold School District is to provide all learners in the Bold community an education designed to develop the creativity, character, confidence, and skills essential to flourish in a changing local society. And we started at 7, and so we will begin the approval of our agenda. Looks like everything is set, nothing to be added, so somebody would like to make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Motion's made by Butto, seconded
Jacobs.
by Jacobs. Any discussion or questions on anything? Hearing nothing, we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right, moving on to recognition of visitors board meeting. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And hopefully weather stays amenable to everybody getting home safely. So, and I think it will. I don't know anything about the weather, so don't listen.
That should be good.
Yeah, okay. Public forum. Our public forum is placed on the agenda for regular board meetings. So during this part of the school board meeting, we give 10 minutes of time, and each person who would like to speak gets 2 minutes of time, and this is a time of listening by the school board. So if anybody would like to speak, now would be the time, and if you do want to speak, we just ask that you come up in front of the camera. So. That's great.
Want me to sit here or just? Actually, if you can talk into the microphone.
So Todd Frank from Olivia. As most people know, I'll be seated on the board come this January. And looking through the agenda, you're going to have under new business item number B at that position. Obviously, not being on the board at this point, I'm not privy to all communications or information that might be sent out. But in the public packet, there's nothing about a job description for this position. And to this point, nothing's been communicated on how this position will be funded long-term. Not only this district, but many other districts throughout the state are struggling using the temporary ESSER dollars and others for funding, and they're putting themselves in a precarious situation on how to fund positions or whatever they use the money for beyond. So I would be voting against this tonight if I were seated on the board, and if there's not a way to long-term fund this, and not a job description that shows how it interacts with our current staff of principal, paras, and maybe it's better use of some of our funds to put towards paras and their abilities within the classrooms. I think it needs to be thought about very thoughtfully, and it's not fair to the individual to get hired in and potentially not have funding, and then you have to let a position go after 2 years. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? All right, seeing no one else, we'll move on to our consent items. And we only need one motion to approve the consent items. And our items this month are approving the bills for payment and approving the minutes from the November 28th, 22 regular board meeting.
So move, Benson.
Motion is made by Benson, seconded by Hanson. Any questions on anything in the consent items? Hearing nothing, we will vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right, moving on to personnel. Approve the resignation of Tamara Nolte, special education paraprofessional, effective December 22nd of 2022.
So move, Butto.
Motion is made by Butto,
Second.
seconded by Sheehan. Any discussion or questions? Hearing nothing, we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right, we'll move on to our superintendent's report.
Okay, it looks like a lot, but I can get through this pretty quickly. As you've probably heard, the state of Minnesota is projecting a $17.6 billion surplus right now. Just hoping that some of that can come to the schools. We've gotten small increments in funding over the last 20 years, but it's just not kept up with inflation the way we have wanted. And so while we're getting more money, we're still, our buying power is still far behind that. So I'm hoping that they can do something to help us out. Pact for Families, they've been giving us 25% of a social worker's salary. And starting next year, they're going to back it off to 15%. And then in the following year, they're going to back it to 10%. And then Tom Cruise would become our employee. And then after that, they're not going to be funding that position anymore. So we're really not happy about that. It was they've been doing this for about 20 years, and it's been great to have a social worker in the school. I'm not worried so much about next year, but the following year it's going to be tough because when he becomes our employee, then we would have to figure out a benefits package for him. And his current benefits package with the Pact for Families group is like something like 39% of his actual salary. So I don't know what schools are going to be doing. I did ask maybe Pact could take a look at the reason they're doing this is because the grant that they get is to do innovative programs in schools. And the way they're seeing it, or the state maybe is seeing it, is 20 years ago, it was innovative to put a social worker in every building. And I suppose sort of to Todd's point about this position, there's no way, we don't have any current way of actually being able to fund that, except for digging into funds that we'd rather spend elsewhere. So I'm hoping they can figure out something, but it's just, I don't know, I'm sad about that. Again, he's not going anywhere next year. He'll be here, but we're going to need to figure out something. I put Snowmobiles Part 2 on there. After last month, I said that the attorney had indicated that, no, don't do this. But Rob Vanderhagen is one of the more persistent people that I know. And so he and I set up a time to talk with the attorney. And after discussing it with them, we've actually come up with a kind of a good plan. Kids can come up there and observe, and a lot of these kids are going to do that. But the kids that want to actually work on the snowmobile, she's coming up with a waiver for us. So they'll actually be able to do that. So, it's not part of our school program, and that's going to be something that we make very clear to the kids that are coming up there and their families. But, hopefully this gives them that means to be able to jump in and actually do some work on those sleds. And if I didn't see the shop this week, but last week there were close to 15 like snowmobiles around in that room. And it doesn't smell the greatest, but it's an exciting program, and there's a lot of kids that are benefiting quite a bit from that. So, so I'm glad we were able to get something going on that. I mentioned a while ago the Tier 1 special ed teachers, according to the federal government, aren't qualified to teach special ed. If the state doesn't do something, we would lose half of our special ed department. And I guarantee you, if we doubled the existing employees' special ed caseloads, we'd probably lose them as well. So the state they're meeting to try to figure out something to keep these people in their positions. So don't know what that's going to be yet, but hopefully they get something figured out soon. We still have 3 long-term sub positions open. Hopefully, we might have filled Did we fill one, Amy?
I'm waiting to hear 100%.
We may have filled one of them, one of the ECFE positions. We'll still have another ECFE position and an art position open as well. So if anybody knows somebody that's graduating from college and looking for something to do for a little while, the art position is starting. Amy, do you know off the top of your head? I apologize.
The art is January 3rd through
Okay.
February 1st.
Okay, to the 1st. Okay, so that's a month. The other ones start a little bit later in the school year and run to the end of the school year. The leadership conference is coming up on January 11th through the 13th. I was just talking to Todd Frank before the meeting here, and he's willing to carpool. So if anybody wants to hitch a ride, or drive and he can hitch a ride, that's a good way to save some gas here on the way up. And let's see, I've got a couple extra things. Amy's not going to be here next week, so the district office will be closed. I'll be around on most of those days. So if you need something from the district office, just let me know and I'll get it for you. Negotiations, we did do negotiations with the administrative assistants, paras, and food service, and we're very close to a deal. We're going to schedule a closed session after the meeting on January 9th, the reorganizational meeting, so we can take a look at that, what they're asking. Like I say, I can't discuss it, but it's very close. So we'll look at it then. And let's see, last thing, the snow days, we had 3 of our 5 e-learning days happen last week. So the state says that we can do 5 of those before we have to either not get paid for them or we'll have to make them up. So sometimes once in the past, they extended that because we had a lot of really bad weather. Don't know what they're going to do with that, but that's just something to keep in mind. The end of the week isn't looking the greatest for weather, so we'll see.
I have a question about the e-learning.
Yeah.
Does e-learning in any way, shape, or form have Zoom classes with those
No.
e-learning days?
No.
Is there a reason why they don't?
Because the way we've got it set up in our plan is that teachers give them an assignment and the kids get 3 days to complete that assignment.
Okay,
So it's not designed to be a distance learning.
but if there's a snow day, could we do that so we could save, you know what I mean?
Possibly.
Turn those into-
If everybody has internet access. though.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but I mean, we know not everybody would, but maybe there's ways we could look into that. I
Yeah.
think,
Because during COVID, we had to do Zoom, so, you know,
Yeah.
I'm thinking instead of the kids not having any one-on-one with the teachers via Zoom, that would be a great way to still have class.
yeah. Well, right now, let's talk about that tomorrow and we'll see first of all, if the state would allow that. That's a good idea.
I think that would really help the kids a lot too.
Yeah.
Still have that interaction with the teacher, because as you know, if there's not somebody there.
And
kind of
especially
have that
like-
pushing you, they're-
Mhm.
Yeah.
And especially like parents that are working, they get off at 5 and the kids are at daycare. Now they have to go home and make dinner and then try to help the kids get all this homework done.
Yeah,
You know, that puts a stress load on the family too, where even at daycare, some daycares have laptops or computers. They can bunch of kids together and still do class.
Well, they have their little iPads.
Yeah. Exactly. They could do that. So I have one more question too about your snowmobiles part 2.
yeah.
You said it's not part of the program. What does that mean? It's not part of it, but they're
It's not
there.
part of the
anyway.
school program. So when the basketball team goes to the LHS tonight, that's part of the school program. And so they're protected with school insurance. And if something were to happen, we would be liable for whatever occurrence happened. But with this, initially Rob wanted the kids to be actually driving, racing the snowmobiles, which I've watched what he does, and it's not nearly as dangerous as it sounds. You know, I think when you hear a drag race, you're picturing top fuel drag racers that are skidding, and this isn't nearly that bad. But at the same time, I can see why the attorney is saying, no, don't do this. So I don't really argue that at all. But we always need to be careful when, I'll use this as the case. So kids have been working on the snowmobile in his class.
Mhm.
They're going up, somebody's racing that snowmobile, and let's say just a kid gets hit by a snowmobile while they're up there. Well, even if there could be a perception that is a school function. There were cases of this, such as a famous Duluth case where a student, the cheerleaders were, I think I don't know if they were waking up candidates for homecoming or they were delivering something to candidates for homecoming. And the school had said, no, we don't want that liability anymore, but their instructor let them do it anyway. And there was a car accident, girl got really hurt, and the school was found to be liable for that, even though the school itself had said this isn't a program. There was still a perception that it was a school activity. So we need to make sure that this is clearly not a school activity. If it were, we'd need to make sure we provided rides for all the kids up there. We'd need to have people supervising, and that's not part of this activity.
So basically what they're doing, they're bringing their own snowmobiles in, they're working on them to get them running?
No, I mean, they certainly could. If a kid wanted to bring up his own snowmobile and enter it, yep, that'd be fine. And that actually wouldn't even fall into this at all. But if they're going up to work with Mr. Vanderhagen and maybe they're using his tools or whatever, because they've been working with him in the class, the courts most likely, if something were to happen, whatever that would be, kid slips on the ice, the attorney said that courts would most likely say that that's on the school. Now, if we wanted to create an activity around this, we certainly could do that. They're still going to say, don't let them race the snowmobiles.
Mhm.
But we could moving forward, build off that and create a school part of this program.
I guess I was under the impression that they were gonna bring like snowmobiles in, like they would bring a lawnmower in and they would work on it, get it running to see how it's put together, how it operates. I didn't realize they were gonna race it.
They are doing,
In the
yeah.
classroom, I
Yeah.
think they are doing that.
Okay.
We haven't seen many lawnmowers lately, but a few more snow blowers than
Yeah.
anything. But I think we've got more snowmobiles in there than snow blowers. So,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, no, it's an exciting program. I'm really glad that we've got that.
Anything else? All right, moving on to the K through 12 principals report. With Mr. Benson.
I don't have much to add for mine. Working on the A&I grant, the Achievement and Integration Grant. That'll be very important to us for some funding and just general programming. We've got the North Collaborative Teacher in Service Day coming up in McRae, which is the January 16th, where there's 4 or 5 different schools coming all together. It's a great day for us. A lot of learning. End of the quarter. It's crazy to think we're at the end of the second quarter. Coming back after break is 2 or 3 weeks right after that. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I can talk a little bit about the Success Interventionist now. We're seeing a lot of issues aren't the right word, but just more needs of our students, behavioral and academic. These students are not special ed students, special education students. They're more of our general ed students. So we're trying to get the help they need before we get to that point of they need one-on-one for the next, 300 hours to get them caught back up. The sooner we can catch it, the less time it takes them to get caught back up. So if we can do that, chances are we're not going to have as many. Right now, we've got some issues. We've got some lost from of COVID. We'll be using or could use the ESSER money for it. So it's not coming out of our money. Yes, we don't have the ESSER money after 2024, but that would help right now. And I know other schools have brought in people, and if it's working, maybe we find a way to figure out how do we keep it. That's kind of why I brought it up last 3 weeks ago now, right?
Mhm.
Questions?
What will this person do to change the behaviors of that's not being done already?
So just more one-on-one time, meeting the kid where they're at. When they're having a behavior, they can go in and work with the kid in the classroom and also pulling them out.
And it's not just behavior.
Correct.
It can be
Academics, homework, there's everything under the sun.
So what grade levels are you looking at covering here?
Ideally, I'd love a K6 and a 712. To be honest, I don't know if we're going to find a certified teacher to do this. I don't know. That grades 3 through 8 right now, that's kind of where we're seeing more of the things come up.
So how would you determine at what level or what child would get that at what grade, at what time of the day? If you're talking 5 grades right now, that's a lot of kids.
It is. So we're starting up our SIT team, our student intervention team. So most of that will be done with teachers, but this could be more focused on that person. And it depends on how many kids there are. Right now we have a few that would benefit from this. One kid could take up 2 hours. One kid could take up 10 minutes. It's going to depend on the need at that time. A behavior could go on for 2-3 hours.
So this would be a certified teacher, so would they be on the same pay scale as a teacher based on experience coming in? I didn't see a pay.
I
in the
believe so.
description,
Yep.
but I assume
Yep.
that's where they would fall.
So they'd have the same amount of hours a day as a
Correct.
regular teacher.
Correct.
So if there's no issues going on, then what do they do?
I could always use a sub.
Sub.
I could always use a sub.
If we had a full-time sub right now, I don't think there's a day they wouldn't have been busy all day long.
So somebody walks in and says, what are you really looking for? What are you looking from me for this? What's really like a required qualification for this job?
Being able to work with kids.
Okay. What's desired as a qualification?
A qualified teacher would be great. We're tested on reading, math, and science. But the tests aren't always the end all be all. We're trying to develop the whole kid here.
So how are you going to differentiate between what behavior this person's going to see? Because, how are you going to, what criteria is a bad behavior or a behavior that needs the interventionist? What deems that behavior?
A lot of it's going to depend on what's going on. There can be a lot of communication between school and home. There's going to be a lot of observations. I mean, I can't give an exact thing because every student is different.
So then does this child, when they're working on, do they get removed from the classroom and work one-on-one?
Could.
So how is that any different than removing that child and putting them with the dean of students and letting the dean of students work with them during the day? And using our dean more? I thought that was the reason.
There's a
why-
perception that we don't use our dean.
No, I'm not saying he's
And
not
this
doing
guy's
anything. I thought we
he's-
could use
he's
him
busy
more.
all day,
Oh.
every day.
Yeah.
Mr. Flan is busy with K6 all the time. There's a lot of times he's dealing with something, I'm dealing with something, and Mrs. Bodine is dealing with something.
This has funding through 2000 or through
2024
So it's completely for 2024.
through ESSER money. And again, I don't know if we could find somebody.
Right. You
But-
have to advertise,
correct.
try and find somebody.
Correct,
We have difficulty finding teachers.
correct.
Yeah.
So does that ESSER money have to be used up like right away?
Well, so that's the other side of this is it would have to be spent by the end of the 24-25 school year. And we're talking, we've got about 800,000.
$800,000, and most of that has to be spent by the end of this year, June.
So why are we not using that for some like facility stuff?
There's things that we can use it on and things we can't. Most of this can't be used on facilities. Some of it can be used for HVAC, but for like filtration and things like that. But most of this has to be spent on, there's 3 pots of money. And the one of those pots is only after school programs. I didn't expect I'd be talking about this, so I don't have all this on.
Which we used last year. We did this after-school program last year for that one.
Could we do that again?
Yeah, like.
We're in the process of
Yeah. And
talking and bringing that back.
Maybe using the funds for that and do kind of work on those behaviors and
Yep, and we are doing some
and
of
using
that.
staff that we already have.
We've got Tom Cruise who has agreed to come in extra hours and work with kids.
Yep.
We're
That way we're not hiring a new position, but we could use the ESSER funds for that. Is that possible?
yeah. I'd sure hate to leave a whole bunch of money on the table. I think.
Right, absolutely.
So
I guess the point that Dr. Frank brought up too about hiring more paras.
again, we're
I
not.
mean, how?
There's no money. to
Well,
keep it
no, but I
going.
mean, yeah, but it's like that also isn't, understand the money part, it's just finding people.
Yeah.
To
We
fulfill the
would
positions
be
too.
gladly. Well, I mean, we want more paras as it is.
Mm-hmm.
That for positions that exist that we need to fill. There's nobody knocking on our door. And it's not just our door, it's all over the place. And it's not just education.
So how much money has to be used up by the end of this year? How much?
800,000.
No,
Or
450,000.
450.
Approximately.
and you can't use any of that on any building?
There's certain items
So what
that you
was-
could spend it on, but not, it has to, it should address the need of the loss of learning of children during COVID. So then it's addressing that parent to teacher structure. It's addressing loss of learning or behavioral issues. It could also help with ventilation issues and things like that. But it tries, you're supposed to use it for addressing the needs of the loss of learning during COVID. That's what those ESSER funds are for. And the pot of money that is left here is, I mean, it will cover summer school. It has to be spent by September 30th. And then there's the third pot of money that Jim has talked about that then has to be spent by September 30th of the following year. And so I have witnessed other school districts have actually hired teams of people to address the needs of these students. And they've identified their needs, they've met with parents, they've set up a strategy to help those students, not necessarily pulling them out of a classroom because you want to keep them interacting with their classmates as well, but, creating a whole curriculum. And from what I understand, you've gone down to a K-12 principal here, and so you're already pulling your dean and your principal really tight. And believe me, Jim has his hands full too. So this position, I have seen very successful in other districts by creating that program that would address the needs of those students that this is really identified for. And yes, that position may go away in another year or two. However, if you happen to find somebody that's interested in a reading specialist position, which is not easy to find anymore, you may be able to develop that person into a reading specialist and work for your Title I program. So you may be growing your own team with that person. So I understand that
You know, it's not easy to hire somebody and say, we might not have you back next year. But the bottom line is, every time we come here, it's for the kids. And that's what we're addressing those needs for. Sorry. But I've seen the program work really well in other districts.
Thank you for your,
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your input.
yeah, thank you. When she said we went down to K through 12 principal, don't we have an assistant?
We have the
principal?
assistant, yeah. She's
Yeah.
taken
We
on a
don't have
lot,
a counselor.
correct, she's
Then
Right.
taken on a lot of the counseling position.
We got rid of a counselor, and we didn't get rid of, we couldn't find one, nobody applied. And then if you remember in May, I said, well, if we can't find a counselor, maybe we could either find another social worker or a assistant principal. And so of those three, only an assistant principal applied, a couple.
Yep.
And that's how we lost a counselor, gained an assistant principal.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our activities report, Mr. Glenn is not here, but just to lift up a couple things out of his report. Congratulations to the Bold XL nominees, Tate Keenan and Mackenzie Visser. And also congratulations to the Bold AAA nominees, Tori Osterfeld and Gage Amber. So that's exciting and good luck. If you have any questions for Mr. Glenn, I'm sure he would
Yeah.
enjoy an email. Okay, so. All right, moving on to school board committee report. Has anyone had any meetings as of late?
Do you want to talk about the facilities committee?
I wasn't at the last.
So you weren't at, you have anything you want to say? I can talk about it a little bit.
Well, I guess I wasn't planning on it because I didn't know I was supposed to.
Yeah, sorry, no,
So if I had known that, I would have prepared something. I know we're having a meeting tomorrow.
yep, tomorrow we're gonna talk about roofing companies and we've got two major ones that, one Garland, who we've been working with for about 10 years or so. And then we've been looking at a possibility of changing to a different company. So we're gonna have a discussion about that tomorrow and I'll present kind of what I've learned from them. We've got Nexus has been moving forward with listening to the committee and looking at different suggestions the facilities committee's had. Now we're scheduling, and I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but we've scheduled some task force meetings. We're going to invite any of the folks that had been participating with the strategic planning task force, as well as anybody that wants to attend, to come and learn about our needs, and they can ask questions, they can have suggestions. So we're going to have 3 meetings with them. We've scheduled the first 2. We want the 3rd meeting to happen after the survey has been completed. So we're not going to schedule the 3rd meeting until the survey is completed. But then there's also 2 meetings scheduled, one to do tours of both of our buildings, one here, one in Bird Island, so that people can see those buildings up front, up close, and they'll get guided tours. Nexus is going to have some posters up showing, ideas, what could happen, what we could do. And again, it's just, we want to do whatever we can to get the community focused on what we need to do here and what they're willing to support here.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on to the full report, which is enclosure number 3. And yeah, if you have any questions for Tracy, please let her know. All right, at this point, we'll have the presentation of the audit.
This is Justin McGraw, and he joined us last year online.
Yeah,
This year, we're glad to have you in person.
yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Justin Brown with CDS District Auditors. And I know we sent across a few different reports to everybody tonight. The presentation, the format we're going to follow, it's kind of a summation of the overall audit report and the letter we sent to you at the governance level to kind of let you know how the audit went, any recommendations we might have for you, as well as any accounting standards that are coming. So I'll start off with my report on the presentation here. And page 1, it's the independent auditor report. Well, page 1 and 2, I guess we'll go through. It outlines responsibilities of both parties, us as the auditor, you as the district. Describes the intent of our audit, which is determine if your financial statements are free from material misstatement. And really, if you don't take anything else away from my presentation tonight, big bold letters at the top on page 2, your financial statements are presented fairly, in our opinion. They can be relied upon gauging performance of the district as well as for future decision-making purposes. So that's the big takeaway. Get that out of the way early. On page 3, we look at the enrollment of the district. And we look at it not only in 2022, but the prior 4 years. You kind of see that trend. In 21 to 22, you had a slight decrease in your average daily membership. It was right around 2%. Looking out currently on the Department of Education's website, they're projecting you to gain a little bit of that back. I think you're at 602 is what they're looking at currently. So you might get a little bit bounce back there. This is kind of important that you guys have been talking about it. Funding for the school, the state funding is largely based on enrollment. So you'll see these changes reflected in your overall revenues of the district. And there's a lot of different items that impact the enrollment of the district. Open enrollment, charter schools, formula funding, weighting factors, all have an impact on that final average daily membership number that you're seeing. So like on page 4 here, you can see you got 2021 average daily membership versus 2022, and the number of students you're serving in the district and from outside the district, and where those students that are in the district, where are they getting their education. So yeah, you had some changes. Obviously, we talked about the decrease in 2022 from 2021. But overall, the number of students that are from your district that are served elsewhere, that did increase slightly. But your charter school ones seem to have come back into the district. So you're seeing that change there as well. Then on page 5, we look at the enrollment detail by grade. And as that graduating class goes out, you're always looking at that kindergarten class coming in, seeing what are our numbers going to be. One thing you can see here is that your incoming class for 2022 is larger than your outgoing class. So you're gaining those students net-wise anyways, which is going to help that enrollment hopefully in the future. On page 6, we have your statement of net position. This is the overall balance sheet of the district. Starting at the top there, you got your current non-capital assets. These are primarily cash balances, accounts receivable balances, amounts owed to you from the state and federal Department of Education. You see you had a little bit of an increase there in 2022 compared to 2021. That's largely tied to your cash balances. You had an increase in the overall cash of the district, and your due from other government balances, primarily the State Department of Education, decreased as well, converting those receivables into a cash balance. Your capital assets, these are your buildings, equipment, vehicles, those types of items. You see you had a decrease in 2022 compared to 2021. That's due to just the depreciation expense of your current outstanding capital assets outpacing any new additions you might have had in 2022. So that wear and tear of the assets you already have is decreasing that value. The next line down, deferred outflows of resources. This one kind of ties in with your deferred inflows of resources and some of your long-term liabilities, largely related to your pension liabilities through the PERA and the TRA. There's those liabilities are based off actuarial assumptions and what they think is going to happen in the future. And when those assumptions don't match up with what actually happened, you see these things that are created, deferred outflows of resources, deferred inflows of resources. They kind of park them on your balance sheet, and then they amortize them out through a period of usually 4 to 6 years against your pension expense. So you're seeing that change there. That decrease is largely due to the amortization of old actuarial assumptions that didn't match what happened in the real world there. So you get a break on your pension expense, and it helps out your balance sheet a little bit as well. Your current liabilities in the bottom half, these are your routine bills, accounts payable, salaries, wages payable, those types of items. You had a slight decrease this year, largely due to the unearned revenue. So you had cash into the district, but you haven't earned that revenue yet. The food service one is one that's typically pretty notorious for that, as people have money in their lunch account balances, but you haven't actually served them food yet. That's an unearned revenue amount that we typically see. And then your long-term liabilities, big decrease there, big decrease. That's largely due to that net pension liability. PERA and TRA had a pretty good year last year for the performance of their investments and the overall liability versus what the assets they have on hand. So almost every entity in PERA or TRA saw a decrease in their net pension liability in 2022. And of course, you didn't issue any new debt. You didn't have any old debt to pay off. So that's largely your big liabilities. There's also some new items there this year with the new accounting standard for leases. You have a little bit of a lease liability there, but the pension liabilities is by far your largest long-term liability. And then your overall net position at the bottom there. So you have a big decrease in that net position, largely tied to those pension amounts. And you can see, how big an impact those pension liabilities can have, or that pension standard is having on your overall net position. And if you kind of remove those liabilities from that net position calculation, you end up with about $8.5 million net position balance. So that's very good for a district of your size. You can see how that impact of that pension accounting standard really hit your net position very hard. So, and again, this is all programs, all funds, all activities that the district participates in. Looking at page 7, looking at your fund balance of the general fund. This is the main operating fund of the district. And you can see your fund balance by classification. So they stayed relatively steady throughout the year. The big change was your committed fund balance, as that fund balance was spent down on improvements around the district, facility improvements. And we'll look at the expenditures and the revenues of the general fund here in a little bit, and that'll give maybe a better idea of the impact your operations had on your fund balance. A few other governmental fund balance, your food service fund, special revenue fund for feeding the students here. You had a big increase in your fund balance there. That was it's great to see. Not necessarily surprising to see with the expansion of the national school lunch program. Your community service fund also had a big increase. It had been carrying a deficit balance for quite some time, and now you've kind of cut that in half with a permanent transfer. Then your debt service fund. Your debt service fund, you have cash sitting in that debt service fund, but you have no debt to pay right now. So really the change there is just interest on your deposits. Looking specifically at the classifications of the general fund on page 9, over not only 2022, but the prior 4 years, you kind of see where that has been. You did see a decrease in the overall fund balance. The primary being those capital expenditures for the facility improvements. And you'll see that when we look at the overall expenditures, your capital expenditures did increase in 2022 compared to prior years. But overall, your fund balance is sitting at a pretty healthy level. As auditors, we like to look at fund balance in terms worth of expenditures, and you're sitting at a pretty good spot there. Usually we look for 3 to 4 months, and you're above that. So that's it gives you a nice buffer in that general fund. If you have any unforeseen large expenditures that need to come up, facility related or otherwise, you have some of that cash in that general fund
But
to
is
weather
that-
those storms.
Is that the ESSER funds that we were talking about that's making it look so big?
No, because your ESSER funds, you get those on a reimbursement basis. So once you pay the expense, then you get reimbursed from the federal government. So you don't have any of those ESSER funds sitting in your fund balance. It's kind of a wash. It's cash in, cash out deal. So you don't get to carry that cash on hand until you find the time to use it in the future.
Roger.
Yep.
What about the non-spendable? I noticed that green line is pretty much gone from 2018, 2019. What's in there?
Yes, your non-spendable fund balance is typically prepaid insurance or prepaid expenses. So something you paid beforehand, and then you're going to recognize that expense in a future period. It's an asset you have in the general fund, but it's not in a spendable form. So the prepaid insurance is what you're looking at with your prepaid expenses or non-spendable fund balance in the general fund. Inventory is another popular one. You'll see that in your food service fund. And speaking of the food service fund, here on page 10, you can see the trend of that fund balance. It's grown quite a bit over the last few years, largely due to the expansion of not only the summer food service program, but the national school lunch program. Typically, the reimbursement rates for those programs are higher than what it costs most school districts in Minnesota to provide a meal. So you saw that increase again, in 2022 in your fund balance. And the Department of Education typically allows 3 months worth of expenditures, give or take, in your food service fund balance. You're obviously over that here in 2022, but you're not alone in that fact. A lot of districts, because of the expansion of those federal lunch programs, find themselves with maybe an abnormally high food service fund balance. So MDE has recognized that, and I think it was only a month or two ago, they temporarily changed that limit on fund balance from 3 months to 6 months. So you're within that window, and they didn't say how long they're going to let that go. They just said for the near future here. So keep an eye on that with MDE, and we'll keep an eye out as well and let you know if they put an end date to that exception to their policy. And then on page 11, community service fund balance. You can see there they've been building a deficit fund balance for a few years here. In 2022, a permanent transfer was made to the general fund to help mitigate that deficit fund balance. So you did actually, not quite cut it in half, but you're making progress. That's the one you're gonna have to keep taking a look at, a hard look at the revenues and expenditures for that fund, and maybe that general fund transfer is the way out of this thing. So. And then the operating funds, or the operating results of all your governmental funds. So general fund, looking at your final budget versus your actual revenues and expenditures here. So you had some changes. Your general fund budget, you can see there, your percentage over under budget was pretty close to what you guys had budgeted for when you did your final budget. The food service fund, this is where you saw that big increase in your fund balance. Your revenues came in way over budget, largely due to the federal reimbursement rates on that national school lunch program. And your expenditures were down a little bit as well, which compared to your budget number, which was largely seen in personnel costs and food supply costs. So those are a few areas where you saw some cost savings, if you will. And then your community service fund, your revenues, or excuse me, your expenditures did come in under budget, which is great for that fund. But you also saw your revenues also came in under that budgeted amount. So that contributed to some of those operating losses that you saw without that general fund transfer. And then your debt service fund. Like I said, I touched on it a little bit earlier. Interest revenues on your deposits is all that's going into that fund now. Let's have a lot of activity for the time being. There's roughly $83,000 of fund balance in there, and it's mostly in cash. So that's an option to take a look at. Now that you don't have any more debt for the district, that can be used for really any general purpose within the district. So if you're going to take out more debt in the future, maybe you save it there based on those issuance costs. But that's just an option and something to think about.
Do you have a recommendation? Do you want that? Would you want to put it to zero, or do you want to leave always something in there?
My recommendation is if you're not going to have any debt, you don't have any plans to take out debt, close that fund. Move the cash to the general fund and use it for really any general purpose. That's public purpose, excuse me, that's authorized by state statute. That's something you can definitely do. Otherwise, you just kind of have this cash sitting there and you're not really sure what its purpose is, you know? But really, you can't leave it sit in that fund until you decide what you want to do. So, and then looking at the general fund's revenue and expenditures, actual, not only in 2022, but the prior 4 years. So you can see that trend. You did see your general revenues did go down in 2022. And we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, the decrease in enrollment. You'll see it on your statements, the state aid or revenue from state sources. That did decrease. I think you had some decreases in the federal aids as well a little bit. But the big one was that decrease in enrollment is reflected in your decrease in state revenues. And your expenses, your expenditures did increase a little bit. And I touched on some of the capital improvements that were made around the district. This is where you're seeing that in the general fund for those facility improvements that were made. So you had a higher than prior year expenditures, but you had more capital activity than you did last year. So that's what you're seeing there. And then looking at your governmental funds, I touched on it a little bit not that long ago. That decrease in your state sources of revenue. That's the big decrease you're seeing here in 2022. Those 6% decrease, and that's a big number. That state source revenue is largely, or historically been your largest source of revenue. So a 6% hit to that, it does have an impact on that, on the general fund. Some of the other items, your federal sources of revenue were pretty consistent. in 2021 compared to 2022 as you go through those ESSER funds. And it sounds like you are all well aware of what ESSER is and what's involved with that. And you got a good brief from Sharon on what you have left to spend going forward and the timeline to use those funds up. On page 15, we look at the expenses of your governmental funds, and we look at this by type. What type of expenses? Where's the money being used that your governmental funds, largely your general fund, is spending? Pretty consistent, for your personnel costs between the years. Supplies and materials, you had a slight increase there. We trace that largely to fuel costs. You had the rising fuel costs, and I guess probably the latter part of the last fiscal year, you had a fuel transportation clause came into effect. You paid a little extra for fuel. Your capital expenditures, I touched on that a little bit as well. Some of the improvements made around the district, as well as one change between maybe 2021 and 2022 is that new lease standard I discussed. Your lease payments used to be considered a purchase service prior to the implementation of that lease standard. Now, the Department of Education considers that a capital expenditure. So that is contributing a little bit as well to your increase in the capital expenditures. Debt service, we talked about it, you have no debt. So that's your final interest and principal payment last year in 21 and nothing this year. And then your other expenditures. This one is, again, largely related to the new pension standard that came out. Well, it's not so new anymore. It's probably about 8 years old. But the PERA and TRA both have a special funding situation with the state of Minnesota. The state of Minnesota makes contributions to those pension plans. As a member of the plan, you get credit for a part of their contribution, which is recognized as a revenue and expenditure on your books. And in 2021, they had a large portion of that contribution. In 2022, you saw that go down quite a bit. And that's all the numbers I was going to cover tonight. So in addition to auditing the balances of the school districts, we also look at compliance. And there's a few different governing bodies that we look at compliance for, one being the state of Minnesota. So this can be things like depository of public funds, conflicts of interest, contracts and bidding. There's a handful of different areas we look at throughout our audit to make sure that districts in compliance with state statutes. So as we said on here, we're happy to note we came across no issues of noncompliance or systemic issues of noncompliance. I'll talk a little bit on some recommendations in the back here. But it usually tells us auditors a couple different things. One is that your team here knows what those laws are, and two, they're making sure they're being followed. The student activities funds, they have their own unique set of requirements from the Department of Education. Again, came across no large issues of noncompliance there. And I'll talk some more about some of my recommendations in the back on specifically student activity funds, because those things are fun to deal with. Government auditing standards. We look at the internal control of the district. How does the financial information flow through the district from the time a bill comes in the mail to the time the check goes out in the mail? Now we have a few different items on here that if you sat through my presentation or Jim's presentation in the past, you probably heard us talk about them. One will be limited segregation of duties, and the other auditor prepared financial statements. So with the limited segregation of duties, that's largely a product of a smaller business office staff you have here. You don't necessarily have the ability to break up every part of a financial transaction amongst the person recording it, the person that has custody of the assets, and the person that is authorized to release those assets. So some people in the office, and there's Lindsay and now Sharon is probably part of that too now, are asked to wear a couple different hats in that process. Right. So this is really, I think this as an opportunity for you at the board level to let you know you're another check and balance in that process. So if you get your board packet and you get a claims listing, you get a chance to look through it and something seems like an unusual vendor or you don't understand what it's for, please ask that question of your team here and be another set of eyes on the district's books. And then the auditor prepared financial statements. So everything in our financial statements is derived from your financial record, but this is a format that we put it in. So we have to disclose that to you as part of our audit. And then the last compliance item, the single audit. It's the use of federal funds. So the federal dollars that the district gets has its own unique set of requirements on what that money can and can't be spent on based on each individual federal agency. And we came across no issues of non-compliance there as far as using those funds for their intended purpose. So this is one that I think probably in the last couple of years might get overlooked a little bit, but it's probably the most impressive in my mind as an auditor because you've had this influx of federal dollars into your districts and districts like yours. And to know what you can spend it on, make sure it's being spent appropriately is quite a feat. So I think that's a big one that your team here should really be proud of. And going forward with all these ESSER funds, it's going to continue that requirement to be up to date on the use of those funds. So, and then in addition to our audit, we also issue we call it a management letter, but it's a letter from us as auditors to you at the governance level to let you know how that audit went. Any change in accounting practices? I touched briefly on the lease standard. We did implement that new lease standard, so you have some lease receivable with some of your space over here, as well as some lease liabilities and right-to-use assets. And that was a new item this year. So if you had a chance to look through the statements, you might have kind of wondered what's this lease stuff about. That's a new change in your accounting practices. And any difficulties we encountered during the audit, we ask a lot, not only of your team here, but the county, the states, your vendors, your banks. We ask for a lot of information from a lot of people to get us to the point we're at tonight. So we just want to thank everybody involved in the audit. We do appreciate their help to get us to this point. And then on page 19, some recommendations we have. So we came across a few items that we want to discuss with you at the board level and some recommendations that we might have. So one item is authorized signers on your bank accounts. There's a few old employees on your liquid asset fund authorized signer sheet, I guess is what you would call it. So recommendation there would be to have them removed. I think it was Nancy and Renee are still sitting on that as authorized signers, and they're no longer employed by the district. So I recommend getting them off of there. Student activity funds. We came across a few instances in student activity funds that were missing a list of officers, student advisor approval of expenditures. Some didn't have any activity at all. These are all requirements from MDE to have those funds active. So I'd take a look. Our recommendation is we take a look at those funds, and especially those ones that don't have any activity during the year. Is that activity still going to be ongoing? If not, you can close those funds out and reallocate those funds according to the statement of purpose form. And then another new accounting standard that we can talk about this year, GASB 96, which discusses subscription-based information technology arrangements. It's really like a lease standard for not a physical asset. Think cloud computing, online subscriptions. What it looks like there is depending on what type of services you purchase or have a contract for, you would look at maybe a right to use subscription asset going forward in the future and a subscription liability for the present value of those payments over the life of that contract. So it'll be very similar to your lease standard, just not for a hard asset necessarily, but computer assets. So that's coming down the pipe with GASB 87 now in effect. GASB 96 is next on the docket. So on the last page 20, is my contact information. So if you're looking at some of this stuff in your free time, I should ask Justin this, or I wish I would have asked him that. Feel free to call, email. If you're ever in Litchfield, stop by the office, I guess. So I'll open up to any questions anybody has right now.
It's well done.
Yeah, thank you very
You ran
much.
through that pretty fast.
I don't want to take up too much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we'll move on to new business. Letter A is adoption 22 payable 23 property tax levy.
I'll make a motion.
Motion's made by Bookto.
Second.
Second by Sheehan.
Question.
Any discussions or questions on this? Hearing nothing, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
I'll save this right here.
All right, moving on to letter B, which is approving the recruitment of a student success interventionist position.
I'd like to make a motion to not approve this right now. Just with the new board coming on, I think maybe it would be a good idea to have work session and kind of look at everything and see where we're at, where we need to be, and where everybody's thoughts are. So I would like to make a motion to not approve it tonight,
Or could we table it
till next month.
like we did last month?
Yeah, it would be till the next month, regular.
I'd much rather we table this than vote it down and then we
Okay.
can't ever do this, because I think we need to further explain why this is extremely important and why it's going to be very beneficial to a lot of struggling kids that don't have access to a lot of extra help. So, yeah, I would much rather see you table it than vote it down.
All right, we'll table it then.
What, you'd have to renege.
Yeah,
Or rescind your
rescind
motion?
the motion
Well,
to,
and you can, you can amend it, right?
It was never seconded, so it
Right,
filled
so-
in the initial, so then you can.
Are we,
just-
sorry, Todd. Are we okay to wait until next month on this, or is this something that we want to get going? Do we want to schedule a work session and maybe have a special
I would
mean?
like to get going on it.
I would too.
I would
I
too,
do.
because I think we need to, like, this is money that we've only got for the time being.
Mhm.
And I agree with Todd. It's a 2-year funded position, and then we don't have funding for it. But
And I understand the concerns too, but
that's kind of why we were given the money.
right,
anyway.
exactly.
Well,
And I just look back at exactly what you said is address the need of loss of learning due to COVID, and that's exactly what this is.
Well, and he just brought up something too. You talked about leasing. Why can't you lease a contract or a contractor person instead of it being just a regular, can it just be a
Right.
contracted position for what you need it for? And that can be discussed if we
we
table
can
this.
have a work session.
Yeah, let's table it. Let's have a work session.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
then-
those are other things. I do think we need to look into this more too, but there's some other options that we could probably work around instead of having it being a locked in
Right,
hired position. So that way, if the money does disappear and we're not tied into it, but then
Right.
at the end of the thing, if we want to, then we can probably look at that and making it a permanent position if we have funds at that time.
Or there might be another position that could
Take over that.
take over that.
right.
Because I think the needs are so great right now. And like Mr. Benson said, those needs are going to diminish over time if we get this program going.
Well, if we table it, it's Christmas this week.
I
They're not gonna be in
know.
school anyway for 2 weeks, so what's the difference?
Right.
So
Yeah,
if we
I
table
know
it,
that-
and then we can work on it after the new year.
I
The
agree.
urgency we would have is that we've got people graduated from college now that are looking for jobs. And this would be a great time to
Mhm.
hook them. You know, you go fishing in the morning because that's when they're biting.
So could we do a work session right before that first meeting in January?
We could,
I would like to make a motion, we start the recruitment process, so.
I'll second.
All right, so Sandy did not have a second for her motion. Todd, I'm probably gonna look at you, just to make sure I did this right. But, so I did not have a second for your motion, but I did have a motion and a second on going ahead with this, right?
The first motion dies for the lack of a second.
So currently, we have a motion and a second on approving the recruitment of a student success interventionist position. Any further discussion or questions?
I would like to have us do it right after we swear in our new people then. And then we'll start with a fresh board and go from there.
here's what we'll do. We'll start advertising, see if we can find somebody.
Mhm.
We've got positions that can be filled. Anyway, so we'll just add that on and gauge interest. The position hasn't been approved, so we can't hire it.
So you're just approving the recruitment. So, I mean, you're really just putting an ad out there.
Or, well, I guess, I don't know.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. Yep. That's what I thought I heard you say, but.
You're fine with, yeah, how it's written here.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Anything else?
So can you read what's out there?
It's
Exactly how it's
improvement of a student's success interventionist position. So
It's not the hire, but.
basically, it's just
It allows us to
approving,
post
putting the
this.
ad out. I mean, I guess that's.
We would still need to approve the position.
Mhm.
So we can still tweak it if we need to.
I think so.
All right. Hearing nothing else, we will vote. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay.
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 Motion carries 3-2. All right, letter C, approve the fiscal year 2022 audit report, which we just have. I will make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion is made by Hanson, seconded by Sheehan. Any discussion or questions? Hearing nothing, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Letter D, approve a revised policy, number 534, school meals policy.
So move Benson.
Motion is made by Benson,
Second, Bookto.
seconded by Bookto. Any discussion or questions on this?
I have a question when I was looking at it. What is our policy now when a child is, or family's over on their lunch? Does the child get a meal or how is that handled?
So, that's a very interesting question. The way this is basically what we've been doing since I've been here as principal. This is almost unchanged as to how we've been doing this. Since I've been here, we have never once, when a kid didn't have enough money in his account, we've never once said, well, you can eat a peanut butter sandwich. We've never done that. But I say it's an interesting question because we've never looked at our policy. Since 2016, I think, is when it was last approved, and it doesn't say this at all. According to our policy, they were supposed to be getting alternate lunches, and it's an ugly, ugly policy. So I'm really happy to say, I verified this several times with Margaret. Like, we've never done this. She's never done that, and she's worked here longer than I have. Yeah, this is just better, and this is what the state is telling us that we need to do, which is why we can just approve it in one reading. Now, this is,
I liked what I read and I like that all students will be provided a regular meal regardless of lunch account
Yeah.
status. And I think in all fairness to a child, yeah, it's not their fault.
it's not their fault. no.
And they need to have a decent meal for the day to learn. So I loved reading this. So I just wanted to see where we were and what we were doing and
Yeah.
say, we definitely have to be doing that if we weren't.
I asked Amy to pull it off of our policies a while ago, just because I was shocked when I saw it. So this is what we've been doing.
Good, that's awesome.
We just don't, we just don't allow seconds. So they can't go back through the line.
Yeah, so on most lunches, a student can buy a second entree. And that's the only thing, they can't just keep going negative, farther negative, so. But we're also working with them, those kids know that. Nancy has always done a tremendous job in the front office, talking to those kids, and we do a little quiet reminder
Nice.
in the line,
Yeah.
but make sure they're not like yelling across, hey, Teresa, your lunch account's empty.
Yeah,
No, they're not doing that. So,
good.
well, some schools have been called out for that.
Do you do the phone calls?
We do phone calls
Yeah.
with the younger grades. We do some letters home. So, because you call a fourth grader down to tell them their lunch account's empty and they think they're in trouble. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And
Why
they
would
can
you
all,
go down?
yeah,
they can all fill out their program money, so
yeah.
do you get quite a few people to do that? I mean, I know
The
it's a big
3 months?
deal for them to fill that out regardless,
So we encourage everyone to fill it out.
right?
I know a lot of people that have, they've got a very nice income, but they've got 10 people living in their house and they qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're just proud and they don't want to qualify for it. But what they don't realize is that we lose a lot of money because we don't qualify for grants, because
Right.
that's how they determine that. I don't know, this makes me angry. They could go to census data and find out, or probably many other ways to find out what our actual socioeconomic level is. But instead they insist on relying on free and reduced lunch applications, which is not a very accurate way to find out what that population is.
Do they bring them back to the school here and you guys
So, yeah,
enter it
they-
in, or is it? sent
initially they're part of
anonymously
the
somewhere?
registration at the beginning of the year. People can fill them out at any time, you know, if you lose your job and you fall in hard times, that next day you can fill that out and boom, we can start getting free meals to your kids.
But they have to bring the information back here. Would there be a way for them to put it online somewhere
That's what we're,
where they,
More discreet.
because
Yeah.
well, like, okay, myself, looking at it, like, I don't really want anybody to know my wages and what I'm making and what and to me, I'd be like, no, I'm not doing it, because how many people are gonna look at that?
Right.
So for them to just anonymously put it online and then nobody has to
Yeah.
see their wage side of it, but they can still follow through and get the lunches.
Amy, I've told Amy that if she ever needs to help me out with something, to just raise her
They
hand.
can apply on Skyward, and it is limited to 2 people that can see that information. So it's
Okay.
not open, and if you,
Okay.
so with that, you can also get reduced athletic fees and stuff. In order to do that, you have to sign off for us to share that information. There's a lot of data privacy safeguards in place to prevent your personal information from getting out.
Okay, so there's 2 people that get to see that then?
2, myself and the head of food service.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
even see it.
Maybe they need to be aware of that, you know,
We-
because
we-
We're
do tell
we're
people
working
that,
on
but-
increasing more policies
Yeah.
and steps in place so that they know more what's all involved. We want to be
Right.
able to say, doing this is what helps all the areas. And some people don't know they can get reduced athletic fees or participation fees for other things with that application.
yeah, and it's
So-
not a bad deal. It really helps the school by filling that stuff
Helps us
out.
out tremendously.
Yeah.
We calculated about 5 years ago, this was just at the high school level, we were losing about $80,000 a year in extra funding that we just didn't qualify for. And that was because, for whatever reason, the parents will fill them out when their kids are in elementary school, but once I don't know, they get just tired of filling it out. Nobody really knows
Probably.
why.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
But they just stop filling it out, and the high school side ends up losing a lot of money. And we assumed that was the number because we compared it. We made the assumption that the high school is going to have the same percentage of free and reduced lunch population as the elementary school. So it wasn't a completely scientific way of doing it, but I think that's pretty accurate.
Probably looking at a parent's point of view, when your kids are younger, you're paying daycare also, which funds are less than.
That's
When they
good
get into
point,
high
too.
school, there's no daycare, but then it's like, okay, we can handle this now, you know.
Other costs for sure.
Yeah.
It's over, so. All right, anything else? All right, so we are voting to approve the revised policy number 534, school meals policy. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Letter E, this is the first reading of policy number 798, donations for negative student food service costs.
We need a way to make sure that when somebody donates money to the school to help with lunches, with lunch accounts, that we've got a standardized way of shelling that money out. So, and then as you'll see on here, we kind of list the priority of homeless students first. So if there's a limited amount of funds, maybe more people are asking than we have, this would be how we prioritize that. I would also add that the community's been very generous. I'd say every year we get people donating money, so individuals and companies. So
All right, so if there's any other questions with that, please you'll be seeing it a couple of times, so. All right, with that, we'll move on to, well, just some upcoming dates. Your organizational meeting will be January 9th of 2023, as well as your regular school board meeting will be Monday, January 24th, 2023 at 7.
And we'll look at scheduling a work session before and then
Yeah.
we'll do a closed session. Did I say this already? I don't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah, okay. Closed session afterwards to just discuss negotiations.
It's good.
All right, so with that, I'll move on to adopt a resolution to acknowledge and accept gifts, grants, and bequests. So resolution for acceptance of gifts, member
Benson.
Go ahead.
Benson introduced the following resolution and moved its adoption. Whereas George Parr Agency, Inc. has generously donated $100 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Southern Minnesota Beecher Cooperative has generously donated $750 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Wilmer Aerial Spraying Operations has generously donated $250 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Keith L. Scott Agency, Inc. has generously donated $100 to Boulder Robotics team, whereas Hometown Bank has generously donated $300 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Kraft Walzer Law Office has generously donated $50 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Eric Shea, State Farm Insurance, has generously donated $50 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Dirk's Blend Funeral Service Inc. has generously donated $100 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas Citizens Alliance Bank has generously donated $250 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas FM Bank has generously donated $500 to the Boulder Robotics team, whereas FM Bank has generously donated $500 to the Boulder Robotics team.
I think I just did that once.
Was it once?
Is it just one?
One.
Okay. Apologies.
We'll discuss that.
All right.
He's gonna go, what?
I was just reading up in here, so I thought you just read it twice.
No, I
I was reading down and I went, oh, that's odd.
All right, whereas Bold Citizens for Progress has generously donated $3,057.91 to the Bold Community Survey, whereas Olivia Appliance Inc. has generously donated $25 to the Bold Robotics team, whereas Port Island Lions Club has generously donated $1,000 to the Bold Robotics team. Therefore, be it resolved by the Bold School Board to gratefully accept these gifts. Motion for the foregoing resolution was duly seconded by member
Jacobs?
Jacob. And upon vote being taken thereon, the following voted in favor thereof. Sandy,
Aye.
Teresa,
Aye.
Todd,
Aye.
Tracy,
Aye.
and I myself, I am an aye. So this foregoing resolution was approved this 19th day of December of 2022. And thank you for all the donations.
Yes, thank you very
much.
Truly amazing, and we are very blessed to have them. So,
And I would say thank you to you and to Jamie for all the work you guys have done. This is your 12th year,
yes.
and Jamie's done 4. So I think people don't understand the work that you guys put into doing this. If you're just looking on, they sit around a table one night a week or one night a month, but it's a heck of a lot more to it than that. And so thank you both for all you've done.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you all, and I wish the board the best of luck, and the new members, I'm excited for new leadership, and I think our communities have so much to offer that I hope we keep moving forward, so. All right, with that, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn. That was a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Merry Christmas and
Merry
Happy New
Christmas.
Year. to
Merry
everyone.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You guys send letters?